What is up, everybody? Mr. Purse here. Welcome to the third video leading up to World War II, the period in between the wars. I call this the build up to World War II because this is going to take us right up to the start of World War II. And before I get into this, I really just want to remind you that the issue of the people, how Jewish people are being treated in Germany is not a cause of World War II. A lot of people get confused because when we think of World War II, one of the first things that comes to our mind is the Holocaust and how Jewish people were treated in Nazi Germany. That is not going to be one of the reasons that people declare war on Germany or Japan. There's other factors going on here. In retrospect, it should have been a reason that people stepped in and stopped this persecution. But at the time, it's not really something that's in people's minds. As I mentioned, for example, in the United States, there's a lot of segregation laws going on similar to the Nuremberg laws. And the concentration camps themselves, the death camps, don't actually start until World War I is 3 years in. So they don't really start till 1942. This time period that we're talking about today is really going to be 1938, give or take, up until 1939. So we got like the 2-year build up to the war. So let's kind of get into some of this. First, I just want to point out that a lot of what leads to the war is military aggression. There are going to be countries going out, 3 of them, Germany, Italy, and Japan, who are going out and conquering other places, and they're being aggressive militarily, whether they believe they deserve the land or whether they just want to conquer it for their own personal gain and natural resources. They're going to go out and conquer. The group that is supposed to stop this is the League of Nations. And whenever you hear the term League of Nations, I want you to think weak, because the League of Nations, which was created after World War I to promote peace, and World War I, by the way, at this point has only been over for 15 to 20 years. The League of Nations that is supposed to promote peace isn't going to do anything to stop a lot of this stuff. So the League of Nations, whenever you hear that, think weak. So if I say League of Nations, you think weak, and they're not doing anything to stop this. So let's get into this. Let's start with Germany first. In 1938, so 2 years after the Nuremberg racial laws against Jewish people, which segregated Jews and Germans as passed, and Hitler's been in power by 1938 for 6 years in Germany, Hitler decides, and the Nazis decide that they want to take over Austria. Most people in Austria, which is just south of Germany, speak German. And Hitler's goal is to create a German empire, or the German Reich. Reich is the word for empire. And in this, Hitler decides that he wants to take over Austria, which is also his homeland, where he's from. So he essentially goes in with his military and then puts it to the vote of the Austrian people. He allows the Austrian people to basically vote on whether or not they want Hitler and the Nazi Empire to take over Austria. Now, the people in Austria are still suffering from the Great Depression, and they look at Germany and they see how Germany has kind of come out, or seemingly come out, of the Great Depression. So they put it to a vote, and this is the actual ballot that people used. My German's a little rough here, but essentially it says, do you want Adolf Hitler to be the leader and to make Austria part of the German Reich, or German Empire? You can vote Ja, which means yes, or Nein, which means no. You can notice the circles are different sizes. It's a little propaganda there. The yes is bigger than the no. Obviously, this person filled out the ballot and checked off yes. They won 99% of the vote. No one ever wins 99% of the vote. You can put anything to a vote, and I guarantee you there'll be more than 1% of the people who disagree with whatever you're putting on the vote. What this shows, and that he wins 99% of the vote, what I'm trying to point out here is that it shows that there's a little bit of pressure going on here. Whether the military was standing over people's shoulder while they were watching, whether there's pressure from officials, he wins 99% of the vote, which is outrageous. And in winning this amount of the vote, he takes over Austria. Now, the League of Nations, which is weak, should have stepped in and done something about this, but they didn't. They allow it to happen because no one wants to get to war. And when Hitler sees that no one does anything with this, he then goes and demands part of the, here's Austria, by the way, Germany's up here. There's a country in between the two right here called Czechoslovakia. This was created after World War I from part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which, if you remember, broke up after World War I. So this new country right here has about 3 million people who live on the border here in this mustard yellow color of German language and essentially German ancestry in their mind. Hitler tells the League of Nations, specifically Britain and France, I want this land. I think this land should be part of my country. They're German-speaking people there. They're not Czech. They're not Slavic. They're German. And those German people should become part of my country. And it's in his mind, and when he demands this, they're German-speaking people. So he goes to the League of Nations, and specifically, again, Britain and France, because they're the two main powers still in Europe at the time. And he says, I want this. So Germany is faced with the dilemma. And this is the Prime Minister of Great Britain. His name is Neville Chamberlain. He meets with Hitler. and he signs what is called the Munich Agreement. And he is holding up this Munich Agreement in his hand. And what the Munich Agreement says is, we, Britain and France, will give Germany this area called the Sudetenland. Again, right here, we'll give them this land. In return, Hitler has promised us to never invade another country again as long as we should live. And everyone in Britain and France were so happy about this because they thought that war was going to be avoided. And remember, World War I is only 20 years before this. And a lot of people had survived World War I and lived through World War I and didn't want to fight another war. And this term of giving something up in order to avoid conflict is called appeasement. We do this all the time in our lives. It could be if someone in your family tells you to do something, for example, go clean your room, and you don't want to do it, but you do it anyway because you want to avoid conflict, that's appeasement. Or if you're mad at your significant other or a friend of yours for not texting you back or not, whatever the case might be, you're not happy with them and you don't say anything because you don't want to have a conflict and you know it's really not worth it, that's appeasement. So appeasement is when you give something up in order to avoid conflict. So Hitler is given this land as a result of the Munich Agreement, and he says, I'll never take over another thing in my life, I promise, cross my heart, kind of all that stuff. And within the next year, he takes over the rest of Czechoslovakia. So Hitler goes in, and the rest of Czechoslovakia does not want him in power. They are Slavic people. Hitler talks negatively about the Slavic people, similar to Jewish people. And the people in this country, this woman is not crying tears of joy. She is very sad. And this is Hitler in Prague, which is the capital of Czechoslovakia. So Hitler takes over this. He's given this, and then he takes over the rest of this land right here. So this is done by military force. The League of Nations, which is weak, should have stopped him, but they don't. Also, this is what Germany is going to look like by 1939 at the start of the war. So we have all of this land. This is what Germany was after World War I, just the brown. Hitler has now expanded Germany into all of these other areas right here and taken over this land up here. His next step, and this is kind of the preview into the next video, is going to be to invade Poland. And when he invades Poland, that's really going to set off World War II and going to be considered the start of World War II. But this is where he is now. And what Hitler's realized is the League of Nations is weak and that they're not going to do anything when he invades countries. So he's kind of been given the green light that, and I think of it, and it's usually portrayed in political cartoons as a little kid. And if you don't tell a little kid, like my daughter, you can't do this, then she's going to keep doing it even if I don't want her to do it. So you have to kind of lay the law down and set the tone. And the League of Nations, which is weak, didn't do it, and that's the problem. While all this is going on, we have another issue going on, and that is in Japan. In Japan, while Hitler is rising to power and Mussolini's rising to power, in Japan, the military takes control of the government in the 1920s and 30s. They are very nationalistic. They're very pro-military. They basically take over and start controlling the government of Japan. And their main thing is to promote Japanese nationalism, this idea of Japanese superiority. And they kind of go back to the Meiji era that they have industrialized in Asia. If you remember a couple maybe a month or two ago, when we talked about this, and in the videos, they've industrialized, they think that they are superior, and they want to go out and prove their domination and prove their superiority. And also remember, Japan lacks natural resources. And if they lack natural resources, they can go out and conquer places, and by conquering places, they can even build up their military even more. So there's this huge promotion in Japan in the 20s and 30s. Our military is dominant. We're going to focus on our military. We're going to train more soldiers. We're going to start at a young age. And this is what we got. These are the women who are going to be trained. You can see them training in using guns. So we also, at this time, are going to have, so what we see Japan do is Japan is going to invade this area up here, which is called Manchuria. It's just north of China. There are a ton of natural resources there. There's a lot of oil. There's a lot of coal, iron. So they invade this area because there's a ton of resources. Guess what the League of Nations does when they do this? Nothing, because the League of Nations is weak. After the League of Nations, which is weak, doesn't do anything, they invade south into China. Now, here's the deal with this, and I want you to keep this in the back of your mind as we move forward. Japan has always been seen as the little brother of China. They've always been treated, in their minds, poorly by the Chinese. The Chinese have always looked down on the Japanese. The Japanese have been seen as being picked on by the Chinese for their entire existence. They've grown up with this idea that they are weaker than China. And now for the first time, they are stronger than China. And they need to go and they need to prove it and prove to the Chinese that they are the best. And one thing that happens in this is what is called the Rape of Nanjing or Nanking in China. And this is going to be a horrible event where people are the Japanese go into China and they basically rape women and kill as many people as possible. There are a lot of stories about this, and we'll talk more about it in class, but there are stories of Japanese soldiers going in with bayonets and with swords and trying to chop off as many Chinese people's heads in the city of Nanjing, which is the capital of China, as possible. And every time they killed somebody, whether it was an innocent person or not, they would mark a little notch in their sword. It got so bad that there are soldiers who talk about hundreds of notches in their sword of killing innocent Chinese people. Also, we have many women who are going to be raped, and that's why it's called the Rape of Nanjing. The Japanese are told by their commanders to rape as many Chinese women as possible. A really horrific time. This is a human rights violation. This is put in the same category, not on the same level, but the same category as a human rights violation as the Holocaust or the Armenian genocide. So this Rape of Nanjing is really one of those times where we look back on history, and the Japanese today still look back as one of those horrific moments where these soldiers go in and do absolutely horrible, atrocious stuff. So we got Japan expanding, we got Germany expanding. Italy is also going to try and expand, and no one is doing anything about it because the League of Nations is weak. So that's what I got. This is the aggression. This is the expansion. In the next one, we'll get into a little bit of what happens during World War II. As always, any questions, let me know. Write it down. Until next time.